The story of the first Thanksgiving is both familiar and increasingly fraught. It's a history lesson that has, over the years, changed and evolved, but what if it's just wrong? Joining me today are Roger Smith, Outreach Manager at the St. Augustine Historical Society and Assistant Professor of History at Flagler College. I'm also joined by my former colleague, Jessica Clark, anchor and St. Johns County reporter at First Coast News. To our listeners, what story were you taught about the first Thanksgiving? How accurate was it? Give us a call at 549-2937. Tag us on X at FCC On Air. You can email us at firstcoastconnect@wjct.org, or you can connect with us on other social media platforms. Join us. Starting with you, Roger Smith. The usual lesson about the first Thanksgiving is that it involved the Pilgrims, the Mayflower, Plymouth Rock.
Right.
1621. Right. What's the real story?
Well, the real story is the Spanish, every time they sailed anywhere, they were just thankful to arrive. And they would get off the ship. They always had a priest on board, and they would have a meal of thanks there on the shore. That was every voyage. And to give you an idea, a classic example of why, when Pedro Menendez sailed from Cadiz in Spain, started out with 11 ships, 2,000 people, including sailors, soldiers, colonists, families, the whole nine yards. His mission was to set up a colony here, and it quickly turned into a military mission. But then they got hit by a storm on the way over, and his 11 ships decreased down to 5, 2,000 people decreased down to 800 by the time he landed. So, yeah, they were thankful to get here. And so this was common practice. You take the ship's provisions, come on shore, and the priest gave thanks. In 1565, on September 8th, when they did that same ceremony in what's now St. Augustine, the priest records that the Timucua Indians who were there, it was their village where they pulled up, they wanted to participate. And they brought some provisions, and it's the first recorded event where Europeans and Native Americans came together. And Michael Gannon, he's the grand poobah of this Thanksgiving story, and he wrote that the Indians emulated everything that the Spanish did in order to make sure they were participating the way that it was meant to be done, and that kind of a thing. It's a very, very cooperative effort and a good get together.
And so, Jessica Clark, you have reported on all things St. Augustine for a long time. You've reported on this issue. Do you remember how you first learned about this alternative narrative of Thanksgiving?
It was with the founding celebration. So in September in St. Augustine, there is a celebration of the founding. So when Pedro Menendez of Spain first puts his foot on the land in St. Augustine, there is a reenactment almost every year, as far as I know.
Yeah.
And it's quite, full of pomp and circumstance, and there are reenactors galore. And then it's the reenactment of Pedro Menendez and the settlers that came with him, along with some Timucua. And then there is a mass with current-day priests, and anybody can participate. And then so you asked how I found out about it. So during these reenactments, then there's a meal afterwards. And that's when I learned, so this meal was the combination of Native Americans and Europeans. And this happened long before 1621. It was in 1565. So that's how I learned about it.
And just want to ask you about that meal, because my understanding is the meal that they would have had at that time was probably not quite what we would think of as a Thanksgiving feast, right?
Yeah. So,
well, the Pilgrims didn't have one that we would think of as Thanksgiving either. So it
good to know.
Oysters, fish. It was Cape Cod.
Yeah.
But on the land, the mainland side of it. But
what about here?
Here it was a stew of salted pork and garbanzo beans and probably some garlic to season it a little bit. The Native Americans, if we're led to believe that they participated and also brought food. It wasn't recorded what they brought, but it would have been anything. I mean, we had in St. Augustine, you have fresh water right there on the shore of the Atlantic Ocean. So you have saltwater seafood, freshwater seafood, every fowl in the air you can imagine, bears, rabbits, raccoons, whatever you want, or wild boar. And it was all plentiful. That's why the Timucua did not. They were not nomadic. They were there at that one spot since 2400 BC.
And by this time, the Timucua were eating corn. It was not corn on the cob, but it was kind of like mashed up, made with a kind of a paste made with water.
Mm-hmm.
And so they could have brought some of this corn gruel with them as well. But I do think it's interesting to note. So the food that the Spaniards had is noted and recorded. What the Timucua may or may not have brought, we don't know for sure, but we can speculate.
Mm-hmm.
And so corn.
Mm-hmm. Well, they had the three sisters: corn, squash, and beans.
Yep.
And that was the vegetable or the agricultural product that Europeans were not accustomed to.
I recently learned about the three sisters, that it was the corn was planted first that would sustain the beans as they grew, like they could grow on the corn, and then the beans provided the nitrogen needed in the soil for the squash. Like it was kind of truly a collective,
Mm-hmm.
endeavor
Mm-hmm.
there for gardening.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And archaeologically, there have been deer bones found
Sure.
near the site where we believe and know that the meal took place, that
Right.
first meal took place.
And
so
where exactly is that if we're going to St. Augustine?
Well, Dr. Kathy Deegan, she solidified that entire scenario.
She's an archaeologist
yes.
from University of Florida.
Yes, uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
She's retired now, but we still work her to death. And no, she solidified the location as being on what we now call the Fountain of Youth, and that was where the city of St. Augustine was founded and given to God, and then that would have been where they had the meal and everything else.
And that's where the big cross is now. Is that right?
That's at Mission Nombre de Dios, right next door.
Okay.
It's located on the property of the Fountain of Youth Archaeological Park.
Gotcha. And so, Jessica, having reported on this, do you find that people are still unfamiliar with this fact?
Oh
or-
yeah. Oh sure. Yeah, I think it's becoming more and more known in Northeast Florida, but outside of our area, it certainly isn't known by any means.
Yeah.
And I think it's nice that it's starting to be reported every year. It's a fun story to report,
Mm-hmm.
but I think beyond our corner of the world, it's just not known much.
Yeah, my wife is from Boston, so this was a very interesting conversation when we first met.
Tell us about that. You mentioned Michael Gannon. He was the historian. He was a man of many skills.
Yes.
Kind of a really, truly a Renaissance man. But
Yes.
he was the one who made this discovery. He earned a funny moniker for it. Tell us that story.
He got a phone call from a radio station, very popular radio station. I don't remember the call letters, but up in Boston. And they asked him about this discovery, and he confirmed everything. And they said, well, I don't know if you're aware of it, but the councilmen of the city of Plymouth are meeting right now, and they have nicknamed you the Grinch who stole Thanksgiving. And he loved it because it's so typical of Florida history. I teach classes at Flagler on history of America, early American history, the history of the state of Florida, and history of St. Augustine. And all three of those classes, for about the first 3 weeks, they're identical lectures because it all started in St. Augustine and then spread out from there. And nobody knows our story.
I want to come back to that in a second, but we do have a caller, line one. Jimmy is joining us from downtown Jacksonville. Good morning, Jimmy.
Good morning, and Ann, what a wonderful experience to hear you every morning. You're doing a great job.
Oh,
Love the
thank you.
show.
Thanks so much.
Uh, of course, I heard a little bit about the menu for these St. Augustine-based, First Thanksgiving, and I wanted to just make a point or ask a question sort of tongue-in-cheek, if you'll allow me. I didn't hear you reference gator as being on the menu at those events. and Native Americans and their admirers, especially from the Seminole tribe, love to enjoy gator about this time of year. So I just thought I might bring that up and see if that was on the menu.
Can't possibly have anything to do with Saturday's game.
Well, it's very possible that they had gator. I mean,
absolutely.
The French artwork,
Mm-hmm.
which can be debated on its legitimacy,
Mm-hmm.
but the French artwork that actually came from Fort Caroline area, has that famous image or
It was like
infamous image,
like a
of,
90-foot gator or something.
yeah,
like
all the
that.
gators being strung up on a rotisserie,
Yeah.
from the Timucua. So certainly gator is something that could have been had.
Absolutely, and that's the estuary that is that area of St. Augustine. I mean, absolutely everything was available there, and like I say, that's why the Timucua never left. Once they settled in that region, there was no reason to leave whatsoever.
They also had cassava bread, which is like hardtack,
Mm-hmm.
and would dip it right in the stew or in the soups.
I'm
Yep.
sure, yeah.
And they also on the ship, so you could look at the ship and see what was brought over. Was it actually taken off the ship for that particular meal is unknown, but olives, olive oil,
Mm-hmm.
wine.
Yes, a lot of red wine, olives, and like I say,
It sort of
it's-
sounds like my Thanksgiving.
Oh yeah.
Just joking.
Just kidding, right? Matter of fact, after Michael Gannon made that statement, somebody from Plymouth said, well, let the gentleman down there know that they didn't have turkey, except in Gainesville, where evidently they have lots of turkeys. And that was the comeback comment. But, we have turkey down here.
Well, they were see the Puritan, Plymouth Thanksgiving probably didn't have wine, I would guess, right? I mean, that maybe was.
I don't know about that. The Europeans were so used to not drinking water because that's where they dumped their raw sewage that any kind of beverage, was. We didn't get that puritanical about our wine consumption until we became a country. So,
Gotcha. So let's talk about the Plymouth story. Why do you think that that's been so sticky in terms of how history is taught and told? Why is it that continues to be the dominant narrative of Thanksgiving?
we are basically an Anglo nation as far as our beginnings and if you want to look at our history, even our mythology. We're very Anglo-centric, and I got asked about my dissertation committee. One of my professors said, "Why does Florida's colonial history fall into such a black hole?" And you know, on the spot, I just off the top of my head, I said, well, basically it's because we were Spanish when it's cool to be English, and we were British when it's cool to be Americans. We were always on the wrong side of the fence because, and that opened up a whole nother, discussion. A lot of people don't understand that during the American Revolution, inside what is now the continental United States, there were 15 British colonies, not 13. East and West Florida became British colonies in 1763, and we didn't stop being British colonies until the Revolution was over, and it was 1784. So our story has always been one of the other side of the fence, looking in, and not in that typical narrative that we're used to.
And so, is it a rivalry with Massachusetts? Is it what is the current temperature on that debate? Do they?
Well, it
still...
sounds like in Roger's household it is, but but I like to think that it's not a rivalry because it's two different stories. Granted, there's a meal involved. Granted, there are Native Americans and Europeans involved. You can make it a rivalry, but I think it's just history. I think it's just the facts. This is what happened. Well, and I also remember September 8th was it was a feast day for the celebration of the Mary Mother of Jesus. And so my understanding is that the Spaniards were going to have a feast that day anyway. Combine that with they just made it through a really long trip.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were going to be celebrating anyway. And so it happened to be that is what took place. Is it a rivalry?
I don't think so.
You don't think so?
No,
Yeah.
no.
I don't think so either. I think it's just what it was.
Yeah. I think the last thing any of us would like to do is tomorrow sit down and eat whatever it was they ate in Massachusetts or here or anywhere else. It's matter of fact, pick up a menu that Henry Flagler had at the Ponce de Leon Hotel, and I won't eat 80% of it. It's just not what we're accustomed to. It's
That's
that kind
right.
of food.
We actually have a call right now, Peter from the South Side. Good morning, Peter. Welcome to First Coast Connect.
Hi, good morning. Thank you very much. And before I get into it, you are doing a wonderful job. Thank you very much. Now, my comment is that someone on your program needs to call Governor DeSantis, write a book, and he will make it required reading in all schools from elementary through college, and you'll make a bunch of money. Thank you.
All right. Thanks for the call. Peter, Roger, you going to make a bunch of money on this?
I haven't yet, so
So teaching about Thanksgiving, learning about Thanksgiving, and celebrating Thanksgiving has gotten a little more complicated in recent years as we've learned more about, the implications and acknowledged more, I guess, about the implications that, colonial era had on Native Indigenous populations. How do historians embrace the complexity of this issue? And how flexible do historians have to be when it comes to looking at what are seen as established facts about history?
I think one of the things that I have always promised my students is I will never teach them anything but the truth. If it happened, we're going to talk about it. And if it didn't happen, we're going to talk about why we assumed it did, how it became some kind of mythology that now it's part of our mantra. But we will always tell the truth in class, and we'll always talk about the truth. So we need to have these discussions. We need to have them openly. We need to understand that basically the Cape Cod region, because of when the French came over with their fishing boats and things and had contact out in the bay with trading with Native Americans there, when the Spanish first arrived, wherever you want to say Ponce de Leon landed, wherever it was, that's where the European contact began. And that was ground zero for the disease infestation. 90% of Native Americans in North America died from the European diseases, and that's something that you have to talk about. It's not debatable.
Jessica, you also have covered so much history in St. Augustine. You really are the authority, aside from people like Roger.
Oh, goodness sakes, that's put me up there.
Is it surprising that history is not as settled as some think it is? Like when we are learning new narratives or debunking stories that perhaps have been lingering around?
Yeah, to me, I think it's interesting just how much new information has bubbled up, in the last 20 years. And a lot of that is just because, archaeology is revealing more information. The translating of documents is revealing more information. The discovery of ships and shipwrecks that, we thought that ship wrecked down there. Now it's up by Sweden. So there are discoveries and revelations that are, sometimes changing, but adding to the history that we knew. So, sometimes I think, oh my gosh, did I report 20 years ago that blah, 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 blah? Well, yeah, I did, because at that time, that's what we knew it to be. And things have changed just because we've learned more. But yeah, sometimes it is sad, I think, that people don't know the history sometimes of their own place, their own neighborhood, city, state. And quite frankly, I think it's a lot of fun to learn it.
History is think of it as a huge jigsaw puzzle. And if you go back beyond any kind of technology, even the Civil War, they had cameras. So if you go back beyond the Civil War, the only thing we know about history is what someone wrote down, what we've dug up from the earth, what we've brought up from the sea, what somebody found in great-great-aunt Myrtle's bureau in the attic, that kind of thing. And hopefully it's documented and filed where it's supposed to be, but it's often not. And as a result, it doesn't matter what the topic is, you never stop discovering things. And people have taken the word revisionist and made it this evil, vile word. And when you revise history because you found legitimate new information, that's a good thing. You're actually taking another piece and putting it into the puzzle. You're giving clarity to the puzzle. I mean, again, in my wheelhouse, the American Revolution, we're supposed to believe that the Southern colonies were asleep for 5 years before, the British sieged Charleston, and then Mel Gibson won the whole war by himself. But it's there's so much that was going on top to bottom, east to west, north to south, and some of this information we're just still now finding.
If you're just joining us, I'm talking to Jessica Clark of First Coast News and Roger Smith, historian from St. Augustine. We're talking about the first Thanksgiving and the evolving story of Thanksgiving. Please give us a call if you'd like to join our conversation. You can call us at 549-2937. You can email us at firstcoastconnect@wjct.org, or you can reach out to us on any of the social media platforms. Jess, is there a particular story that you've worked on in St. Augustine? I mean, all the stories that you've done, you've found things excavated, you've worked with archaeologists, you've worked with so many historians and reenactors. I mean, what are some of the stories that have emerged as your favorites in St. Augustine?
Oh, I think Fort Mose is on the. If it's not on the top of the list, it's close to the top of the list. The Fort Mose story is just amazing. The first settlement of free blacks in what we now know as the United States of America, and they were able to flee from the farms and the homes they were working on in southern colonies, and given to they pledged to be Catholic.
Yeah,
be part of the military and support the Spanish flag. And then they became free and they settled there. What a story that is, because that's north of the fort in St. Augustine, the Castillo de San Marcos. So they were protecting, with this new life almost given to them, they were protecting the rest of St. Augustine.
They were
It's
a sentinel.
incredible.
Any kind of land invasion coming down from Georgia, they hit Fort Mose first, and that was the sentinel to send the message back to St. Augustine that we're under attack. So their location wasn't an accident.
Right.
As far
Exactly. Strategic.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. You know what is a fun fact that I find about the Thanksgiving, the meal in St. Augustine, if you will? And they had tables. Now, you think they get off of a ship, right? And then they're going to just probably have a picnic. No. Now, Roger taught me this, that there were tables for the elite who were on the ships, because there was no way they were going to sit on the ground.
No.
And they used their silver goblets or pewter goblets, whatever it was, and chairs. And, the rest of the common folk probably did sit on the ground. But you just paint that picture, right, of what that meal was like. They were sitting at a table.
I think Kathleen Deegan was involved also in the Fort Mose kind of discovery and the evolution of that story. And I think of that as somewhat similar to the first Thanksgiving story, in that it took a really long time for that to become part of the narrative of St. Augustine.
Yes.
I think even when I first moved to Northeast Florida, the story of St. Augustine was all about its colonial period and not the stuff that predated it so much. Certainly nothing involving the Timucua. So all of that has kind of become more part of the discussion.
Absolutely.
Right. If you'll notice, we're having movies come out, and like World War II movies. We're still making movies about World War II, but it's movies like The Monuments Men, and League of Their Own. It's movies that are more about what was going on around the war instead of the war itself and the battles itself. And that's what we're doing, I think, now in St. Augustine and in a lot of American history, is we're starting to look beyond the normal, what I'll put that in quotes, the normal narrative that we all grew up with, and we're looking for the stories that we haven't heard before, that we don't know about, and let's get those out there because these are some amazing stories to tell.
I think social times have also added to that. People who are making movies and people who are making plays, they were not part of the social mix who was doing that 50 years ago. And so now that we have different perspectives from different parts of our world, who have a say in what is part of our culture, we do have different stories coming out.
We've got a message from Ed on Facebook, and he says that a year earlier than this feast we're talking about, and I might slaughter this, René Goulaine de Laudonnière had a feast in Jacksonville. Is that something that's part of this story as well?
Very possibly he did.
Oh, yeah. And like I say, it was not uncommon. They were the Huguenots who landed here were very religious and devout, and they were trying to set up a free Protestant community here in what was still considered at the time Spanish Florida. And so, yeah, they were very thankful to arrive safely anytime they went anywhere.
Now, Roger, my understanding is the story in St. Augustine with the meal between Europeans and Native Americans, that's the first recorded
There's the
meal.
key word.
Okay.
Right, recorded.
Okay.
And we can make assumptions on everything else, but if you want to look at what we know as factual history, we have that information now and have since 1965 that this was a recorded event. And that's where maybe 50 years from now, someone's going to find something, who knows where, and find that Ribot or Laudonnière had a meal with Native Americans in Jacksonville. I don't know. You know, that's why you keep studying it.
We do have a call from Ed in Fleming Island. Good morning, Ed. You're on First Coast Connect.
Good morning. Thank you for the show. Very interesting. Just wanted to mention, I remember reading or hearing years ago that when the British occupied St. Augustine, of course, the Spanish were there already for a long time. They used to make fun of the Spanish because the Spanish would dig their outhouses. Of course, back then there was no indoor plumbing in their back, and they would do shallow holes, put the outhouses on top, and then of course they have to change location every short few years. The British would dig deep holes and then put the outhouses on back. And the British thought it was dumb for the Spanish to do it so shallow. They found out later that the Spanish were doing it the right way because the high water table, the British were contaminating their own drinking water. And the Spanish, of course, have learned from years of experience that they need to do shallow holes so they wouldn't touch the water table. Then they had the well, their own drinking well, next door to it.
Very
I thought it was
interesting.
kind of interesting how, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great show. I'll let you go.
Thanks for the call,
That's
Ed.
awesome. I'd not heard that, but it makes
either.
complete sense.
It does.
And
Does. I love that realization, right?
yeah, and because the Spanish spent so much time in the Caribbean, it would make sense that they would have learned that by the time they got here. And yeah, I love some of the stories that you hear around St. Augustine about these graveyards where there's, because of the yellow fever, each grave is 25 bodies deep, you know, and that kind of a thing. Well, in St. Augustine, our water table's not that far down, so that's not the way you would do it. If you're going to have a mass grave, it's going to be shallow and wide, you know, and that kind of a thing. But he's right about that, though. You get down too far, you're contaminating your own resources.
Yeah, and in fact, there are elevated graves like in some of the Menorcan cemeteries in downtown St. Augustine, right?
No, they're not elevated.
Well, I think the Tolomato has a couple. Yeah. I mean, they're
Okay,
but not a lot.
yeah, mausoleum style.
Yes,
You mean?
right,
Okay, yeah.
yeah.
I don't know if it's out of necessity. Maybe so. You know who the folks at Nombre de Dios would know the answer to that question.
I'm so happy to have both of you here today and for this great conversation. I really appreciate you being available. Jessica Clark, thanks so much for coming
This
in.
is so much fun. In time to talk history. I love it.
Roger Smith, thank you so much for coming up for this discussion.
Thank you for having me.
I hope you both have a great Thanksgiving.
You too.
Thank you.